Okay, hello everyone. Today's December 20th, 2015, and you're looking at episode 22 of At Percussion. With me today are Megan Arns,
Hello.
Laurel Black,
Hi.
and Ben Charles.
Hi, everybody.
So our guest today performs widely throughout Nashville as a rock and country drummer. He performs with the Dennis Shepard Group, Amber Hayes, Clay Underwood, his own band called Wide Range, also Craig Wayne Boyd, the winner of The Voice, and he's even performed with Aretha Franklin. As a symphonic percussionist, he has played with the Nashville Symphony, Jackson Symphony, and the Murfreesboro Symphony. Jeff Mulvihill is also a percussion product manager at KHS America, which is how I know him because he's one of my go-to people at Majestic and Mapex, and I guess now Sonar, so that's very cool. And so Jeff Mulvihill, how you doing?
Hey, thank you. I'm doing great. What an introduction.
I know, it was big. It was big. I do it right. Hey, how was Midwest? You must have just gotten back, right?
Right. Midwest was fantastic as usual. It's always kind of cool to hang out in Chicago this time of year, and of course the conference is always great. A lot of business, a lot of people, a lot of music. So yeah, it's always a good event.
What do you primarily do at a trade show? I mean, I know you know that I know because I see you at those, but for some of our listeners, kind of describe what your purpose with KHS is there.
Well, there's several important things that we try to connect. First of all, we have a large physical booth offering a display of all of the instruments that fall under all of our brands. You mentioned KHS America just a minute ago in the introduction, and let me just clear that up. That's a parent company for Majestic Percussion, Mapex Drums, Jupiter Band Instruments, EXO Professional Brass, Altus Flutes, and now Honer, Sonar, Infused Audio, and a number of other smaller accessory brands, all under one roof. So our booth is quite a display of everything from student instruments to professional instruments to instruments designed for rental pool in the band and orchestra dealer, which sort of leads me to our next objective at a show like this. We do connect with all of our retail partners at some place like this. We have the opportunity to meet with those people who run businesses like Woodwind and Brasswind and Music and Arts and Percussion Source and Steve Weiss Music and Lone Star Percussion and all the general places that we all make purchases and buy our sticks and heads and mallets and music and instruments and reeds and all of that sort of thing. So it's an important way for us to connect with those business partners. And probably the most important thing at a show like this especially is connecting with the music educator. We're very open and honest, and we have fun with having conversations with band directors and general music teachers on what they're doing in their classrooms, what they're doing with their bands, what their needs are, how we can do better from our customer service end if there's a problem. We really try to hit all of those three big objectives pretty hard at a show like this.
You know, Will Marinelli asks, let's see, what are some unique aspects of your job at Majestic that most people may not know about? I don't know if that included a bunch of what you just said. Is there anything you do that people might not assume you do?
Well, I think the important thing to get across is that there's so much involved. First of all, music industry jobs like this, we're not big, huge, massive companies like Walmart or Amazon or something. We don't have hundreds and thousands of people doing this business. There are about 100 people at KHS America, and that means that most of us are involved with, or most of us in the marketing team anyway, are involved with instrument development, research and development of new and improving parts of our instrument lineup. Also, artist relations is a big component of what we do. We do have specific artist relations people, but in a position like mine, Casey, as you know, you hit me up for when there's special events and we communicate about those things and we support each other directly. Marketing specifically as we design our advertising effort, whether that be digital or print or um, anything else we have going on. I'm in charge of putting together special events. I usually am sort of the point guy when it comes to organizing our all of our activities surrounding PASIC. So there's the physical part of it, there's the marketing part of it, there's the communications part of it. I usually manage special orders or large transactions that need a little bit more hands-on percussion specific knowledge for, because you have universities making a large purchase or something like this. So there's a sales part of it involved. Um, so what is something that someone out there might not know that I do? It's probably best to say that you might not do an awful lot of these very specific things almost every day. The menu of events in a day or a week could include all of these things, or one, or three, or two, or whatever may be going on at the time.
Well, I'm always amazed that no matter who I call there, whether it's you, Chris, or Rick, I'm never calling the wrong guy. I don't know if that's kind of a standard thing in the industry, but I feel like Rick's title is artist relations, but yet if I call you or Chris, you guys don't go, Casey, you really need to go to Rick for this. You know, it's so I would guess a lot of people don't know that.
Um, yeah, I think that's a unique characteristic for us as a whole team at KHS. We're open, we're friendly, we're easy to communicate with, and whatever it might be, I'm not just going to hit the button and transfer you to another department or something like this when it's not quote unquote my job. We just sort of handle it. If I'm traveling and doing something else, I've got people that take care of something that needs to happen at the office, and vice versa. I'm glad to step in when it happens, and I think that mindset, I'm hoping I'm saying it right, that it sets us apart from some others. So it's just our the way we feel about who we're talking to.
So I actually had a question. One thing you said was that, obviously any of these music companies are not very large companies, but relatively recently, as far as I know, Majestic has developed this huge line of concert instruments with marimbas and vibraphones and xylophones and so on. And for a company that's relatively small with that many people that are spread, I don't want to say spread thin, but spread widely, it must be difficult to develop like such a vast line of instruments. Do you hire some sort of engineering acoustics consulting firm, or is that all done in-house? And kind of what's the process behind designing these new instruments?
What a question. That's great. Let's when I mentioned that there's about 100 people, that is only here in the USA. Okay. We do have engineers on staff, research and developers on staff, as well as factory technicians on our manufacturing campuses, both in Taiwan and China and in Holland. So we in the USA tend to lead the effort when it comes to marketing, lead the effort when it comes to the conceptual design of our instruments, the physical execution, physical engineering, physical materials procurement, things like this are handled from our manufacturing side of things in these other places. So we are part of we're here in the USA, we're a large part of an international effort. So, right, there's Majestic has really only been in the States since about 2009, and we do offer as complete a catalog as anyone does, from timpani to bells to marching drums to snare drums to everything that you might need concert or marching percussion wise. And it was developed fairly quickly as things, as you compare to others. It was a commitment made to by KHS proper to not only just get more serious about the percussion business, but to get into it and do it right and do it in a way that we can be competitive.
Yeah, and I remember actually seeing a Facebook like a YouTube interview with Casey, and Casey talked about seeing these new Majestic instruments with all the other brands, and he was saying it's amazing how quickly they've developed, and they did stand up to the other brands that had such a long history. So it's really interesting to hear about, how quickly it did all come together.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you observed it that way. We didn't get into this without our own speed bumps, but I think we recovered quickly and learned lessons quickly. And from the people involved, Casey mentioned Chris Hankus a little while ago. He's been around as a percussionist and in and out of the industry, and so have I for a long time. We've learned lessons from places and other experiences, so we were able to come to the table very quickly with what the needs of each instrument had to be. So we didn't have to go through several versions of a rough draft physically before we started bringing product to market. We were able to bring an initial round of instruments, make some small tweaks along the way, and now you see what we have on the street. And all that to say, we're not done yet. We believe in continuing to refine, continuing to explore. Just for example, if any of you, well, I know most of you play the marimba at least a little bit. We know that rosewood is in short supply these days, and it's a commodity that's getting more expensive and more scarce. So we're exploring different ways to produce marimbas that sound right, perhaps using alternative materials. That's going to be a real problem sometime in the near future for everybody who makes marimbas and plays marimbas. So, for instance, we just don't sit around and keep shipping out boxes the way they are. We are on a constant path of exploration and research.
Jeff, you went to UT, right?
Yeah, University of Tennessee, go Vols.
Yeah, me too. Yay, woohoo. Yeah, I remember you coming in. I was a student, and I think then you were working for Pearl, and I remember we would get new drums, and you came in, and it was like, oh, that's Jeff. He's like the guy that brings us drums. But I found something the other day. Did you ever study with Jerry Coker? Did you take any of his classes?
Yes. Jerry Coker was a huge influence on me at the time. For those of you who don't know, he was the head of the jazz department there at the university. And
yeah, I found his book.
That's right. I took jazz piano with him, and I played in the big band during the year he retired, where we featured an entire concert of his original music, which was quite something. He's perhaps more well known as the author of several improvisation books, rather than a composer of music, but he's got some really thrilling music for big band that's really sort of taking, it's not like Count Basie's swing big band music. It's like pretty progressive, almost new music for big band ensemble, which was really quite something interesting.
Yeah, he was great. I took his jazz piano class, and I remember he was always very encouraging, but a realist at the same time. And I remember one time he told me I have a savvy for the blues, and I said, I don't know what that means, but I'll take it. But anyway, my question, which it looks like from what Megan's typed is kind of similar to hers, is when you were listing everything that you have to do, like in school, were you one of those guys that was really into the gear and how stuff was made and how that affected it, or did that just kind of develop after school, as you were working for these companies?
Well, let's see. I was always kind of a drummer gearhead. I would collect and read viciously all of the different manufacturers' catalogs and information that they put out from everybody, stick guys, cymbal guys, drum guys, percussion people, everything. That was always pretty interesting for me. The one thing I did come to realize as an undergraduate, you mentioned UT, I haven't thought about it in a little while, but when I was there, I really wanted to be the absolute best at everything. I wanted to be like the best marimba guy and the best timpanist and the best drum set player, and I wanted to know everything about electronics, and I wanted to know everything about hand drums, and I was the section leader of the drum line, and like I was doing everything possible under the sun, and I quickly realized after a few years that it's pretty difficult to be absolutely awesome at all of that stuff.
Mhm.
So what I found is that got pretty good at a few of those things and really good at a couple of them and was able to focus. Um, so that being said, that sort of gave me a little bit of groundwork to work for a company like Pearl Adams and of course now Mapex Majestic, where our catalog is top to bottom, uh, drums, mallet instruments, timpani, you name it. You know, I know how to
Mhm.
play them. Um, I know what other people are expecting when they play them. I know what they need to sound like in different environments, outside, inside, concert hall, recording studio. Um, so it sort of set me up for um, an industry job, I guess, and a little bit of luck. Just like every gig, there's a little bit of luck in there somewhere.
Hey, when will we see those brass shell snare drums that Laurel and I played on at PASIC?
Ah, well, you guys were the first round. We had two different ones at PASIC. For those of you who didn't know, I've narrowed it down to one shell type, which I then took out for a second spin here at Midwest, and I'll have it at NAMM. I'm currently goofing around with a couple things: head selection, snare cable selection, um, and it really sounds quite good in its current form, but it's raw brass, which means fingerprints stick around and it's probably going to tarnish over time. So I need to experiment with one of two things: either some sort of clear coat lacquer to protect it, or I may have it plated in another color or something. Plating will protect the inner brass, and that
Mm.
means that it might sound slightly different. I have to sort of goof around with treating it on the outside and the inside, or the outside only, or something like this. So we're through the first round. We like the shell size and the shell thickness, and so we move through some other things like NAM, and then get to work on the next thing. Hopefully, reveal it or actually put it into production for next fall.
I think to do the fingerprint thing, there should be a revolution in hand washing. People don't do that enough. I think that'll prompt a new wave. Hey, speaking of instrument development, Ben is going to do a historic segment on a very well-known percussion manufacturer.
Yeah, so I wanted actually today to talk about maybe the most well-known clarinet player among percussionists, oddly enough. Um, so when I think about like great instruments to play on, I think a lot of percussionists kind of start to salivate when you start to mention the artist special xylophone or the round top glockenspiel. These are sort of things that get percussionists excited. These vintage instruments, and both those instruments I mentioned were developed by John Calhoun Deagan, who is going to be our topic for today. I think many of us are familiar with the Deagan name, but might not know kind of all the history behind Deagan. So as I mentioned, Deagan actually trained as a clarinet player. He was not a percussionist. He was born in Hector, New York on November 6th, 1853. He died in Hermosa Beach, California on April 28th, 1934. He was the eldest of 10 siblings. And he grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, and attended Rains College. Upon graduating from high school in 1971, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy, and he was on the USS Brooklyn ship, which docked in English waters. So while he was in English waters, he was able to study music at the University of London. And then additionally, he attended lectures on acoustics by Hermann von Helmholtz, who is a German physicist, and that kind of started a very early interest in science and acoustics tied in with music and arts in Deagan. So he was in the Navy for 5 years. In 1876, he was discharged, and he returned to Youngstown, Ohio, and worked as a carriage painter, so painting like horse-drawn carriages, which was a trade back in the day. And then he kind of moved on to a musical career. He went through several jobs, but he ultimately ended up as the orchestra director at an opera house in St. Louis, at the Opera House. He was the orchestra director there. So then he started to become dissatisfied with some of the instruments he heard in like theater bands that he would play in, particularly glockenspiels, which were kind of crude and borderline unpitched, actually, almost back then. Very, very out of tune, very rough instruments. So he began studying acoustics quite in depth. He read Hermann Helmholtz's doctrine on acoustics called On the Sensations of Tone as a Physiological Basic for the Theory of Music. And he used this research that he did to develop the first scientifically tuned glockenspiel, which he began manufacturing in 1880. So 18 years later, after developing this instrument, he finally dedicated himself full-time to manufacturing instruments. In St. Louis, he set up his headquarters, and then a few years later, he moved to San Francisco, and then a few years after that, he moved to Chicago. I read that he ended up in Chicago in 1897, but then I also read that the Deagan building in Chicago was finalized in construction in 1912 and also 1919. So it seems like, depending on who you ask, it's kind of unclear, but early 20th century he began full-time in Chicago. The Deagan Company was incorporated in 1913 as J.C. Deagan Musical Bells Incorporated. Then 3 years later, they just changed their name to J.C. Deagan Incorporated to kind of reflect the more variety of instruments they produced. In 1910, he was a charter member of the American Federation of Musicians, and he persuaded the AFM to adopt A equals 440 as our standard pitch in the United States. So orchestras everywhere have J.C. Deagan to thank for our A equals 440 pitch. And then in 1914, the U.S. Bureau of Standards actually requested a set of tuning forks from Deagan. So Deagan provided, I think it was from 100 to 2,000 hertz or something like that, tuning forks as the U.S. standard. So quite, a standardizer in U.S. music. And then in 1915, he invented, I love all the names of his products, the Deagan-o-meter, which was the first kind of tuning mechanism for orchestras and bands, kind of the predecessor to like the modern like stroboscope type of tuners that we have today. So he produced just a massive variety of instruments. This was kind of during the vaudeville era, most of which I would say actually didn't stick around until today. And he had such kind of an influence over music in the day that Percy Grainger in 1916 wrote a piece called In a Nutshell, Suite for Orchestra, Piano, and Deagan Percussion Instruments, which I cannot think of a single other piece of music that has like a brand name in a title like that. So Grainger actually called for 4 Deagan percussion instruments, and he described them as marvelously perfected examples of American inventive ingenuity in the field of musical instrument making. So Grainger in this score calls for steel marimba or steel marimbaphone, wooden marimbaphone or marimba xylophone, Swiss staff bells, and nabimba, which was kind of a descendant of Latin American marimbas that had the buzzy resonators. They had membranes in the resonators to make them buzz. So now when people perform this, a lot of the time people will like put paper on top of the marimba keys to try and get some sort of buzzy tone. And then one of the most wild things that I learned about while researching this is in the early catalogs you see this distinction of steel marimba or steel marimbaphone, or marimba or marimbaphone. There's that phone word attached, which these instruments, it's bizarre if you look at pictures. The instruments that had phone attached to the name, like steel marimbaphone, the bars actually would pivot inward like this. They had like a mechanism so you could tilt the bars in so you could play them with bows more easily. So a steel marimbaphone, it was kind of like predecessor of the vibraphone. It didn't have a pedal, but the bars would literally turn in so you could bow it, which immediately, like, I went to, think of threads. Like, what if for the first movement you crank your keys up? And then in addition to that, speaking of threads, he also had an instrument called a pipelophone, which was like literally just steel pipes, kind of like we use on threads, or I don't know if they're steel, but metal pipes like we use on threads. So this guy was thinking of Paul Lansky's work, 80 years or something before it happened. A couple of my other favorite instruments made by Deagan, one of his more novelty instruments, was he made musical coins, which are coins that if you spin them produce a certain pitch. He made the chimes used for the NBC tone, the NBC. The chimes that you hear on the radio for that were Deagan instruments. And then one of the weirder instruments was he actually made a full chromatic set of metal Anklung that he called organ chimes, or they're also known as shaker chimes. And I saw on the Facebook gear, percussion swap, whatever shop, Dean Prouty posted a full set of these for $16,000 if anyone's interested in purchasing them. But Mark Ford had a full set of these when I was in Texas, and I got to play with them. They're all mounted on this rack, and you can shake them to kind of sustain a pitch. And there's actually a very good YouTube video of people playing these. And then let's see here. He was also responsible for selecting rosewood, which we spoke a little bit about earlier, for the best material for xylophones and marimbas that we still use today, and is kind of becoming endangered. So now, like we previously mentioned, people are starting to searching for alternatives. In 1930, a very young Claire Omar Musser joined the Deagan Company as manager of mallet instruments. And kind of became the marimba guy and performed and obviously took the marimba orchestras around the world promoting marimba music. In 1948, Musser left the company and started his own company. And then, let's see here, Deagan passed away, like I said earlier, in 1934. In 1978, his daughter sold the company to Slingerland. Then in 1984, it was sold to a corporation called Sandlar. And then at some point, Yamaha purchased rights to the Deagan name and their glockenspiel and chime patents. So Yamaha makes kind of the evolution of those instruments today. In 1999, John Calhoun Deagan was inducted into the PAS Hall of Fame. The Deagan building is still intact in Chicago. In 1980, Gilberto Serna, who was the last person trained by the Deagan master tuners, started his own company called Century Mallet Instrument Service, which is in the Deagan building. Gilberto had worked for Deagan for over 15 years. He recently retired, and the Century Mallet Instrument Service has been taken over by Andres Bautista. And on their website, they have a great museum page that displays kind of some of the Deagan history with photos. So that's really cool. And then there's also a really cool video from a program called Chicago Tonight, on the old Deagan factory that shows off a lot of the instruments and has some cool footage there. So that is, and sorry, there's one more resource I used for my research called DeaganResource.com that has a lot of great information on these old Deagan instruments. But yeah, this it's really interesting. I don't think many people know that this clarinet player, who is a very humble guy, just very interested in all sorts of science, was responsible for so much of percussion instruments and just American music today.
Hey Ben, is this the instrument right here?
Yes, there it is, right there.
Yeah. So they're calling that the tubaphone. It even says Deagan right there.
Yeah. I've heard it called a tubaphone, and I think I remember reading something by, I think it was Bill Kahn, on Saber Dance by Cacciaturian actually calls for a tubaphone, not a xylophone.
Oh, funny. Yeah, you always hear it with the xylophone. But this, this book, I'll show you all the cover in just a moment, but when you mention all the technical specs of percussion and tuning and all those things, this book I have read a lot of, but it gets very technical and it gets beyond my understanding. But yeah, it's
when was that published, Casey?
Let's see, Series in Popular Science, Volume 3, The Science of Percussion Instruments by Rosing, and let's see, when.
Well, Casey's searching for that. I will say it would be really convenient if you could buy that tubaphone or pipelophone today, because I've made the threads pipes, and you get a hacksaw and start going at metal conduit piping, and you really risk, cutting off a finger or something.
Yeah. 2000, Megan.
Okay.
And then it looks like reprinted 2005, 2008. But it gets really detailed with the physics of a drum head, and it turns out that the sound physics of, say, of a string are so much simpler than that of a bell or even just a timpani head because of all the places it's vibrating and I don't know, it's just very.
I will say there's this very interesting lineage. We talked a bit about it, I think it was last week, with Deagan is obviously linked to Musser, who's then linked to Vida Chenoweth, who's then linked to Lee Howard Stevens, and I saw on Facebook that Lee Stevens recently spoke at like the American Acoustical Society or something like that on mallet percussion instruments. So yeah, there's quite a bit of science and research. I'm sure Jeff knows this from working at Majestic, but quite a bit of science and research behind these mallet instruments that we just kind of bang on and don't really think about it, I think.
You guys know we had my dad on. He's a mathematician. He always asks me about science questions about music, and he and I are both always amazed at how little I know about it. Like there is no science of acoustics class. There is no physics of sound.
I actually had an acoustics class in my undergrad.
Well, I mean, yeah, they're there. They do exist, but was it part of your required curriculum?
Yeah, at North Texas, we had to take like 1 or 2 science classes, and for music majors, they designated that was one of the ones you had to take.
Interesting. Okay. Well, then I guess I'm wrong, and there are of course exceptions. But I was just kind of floored to discover, like, yeah, there's so many basics of physics and sound that I don't really know much about, and a lot of musicians tend to not know about. So.
Great historical review. That's a lot of information. You're bringing up books and references. I wanted to also, you probably used this as one of your references, but there's a great percussive notes journal from the early 80s. If you guys grew up reading the printed version of percussive notes, you also know that there were research journals cataloged along the way, and there's one that goes from top to bottom listing all of the Deagan instruments from their catalog with model numbers and all of this. And if you sift through those pages, there are just any number of xylophones, marimbas, and bells and chime sets with really oddball ranges and funny names and all of the different. I mean, there's a. I think at one time you could buy racks of tuned sleigh bells in about 3 octaves.
Wow.
So he made some very interesting instruments along the way, and some of it has been over the years been dwindled down to what we all know as the sort of the standard mallet instruments today. But you're right, that whole part of history with J.C. Deagan and others through that era was quite an interesting little bit of history.
So
check out this Deagan aluminum harp. This thing.
Huh.
Yeah, I'm just opening random pages and I keep finding Deagan
just
instruments.
Like bizarre instruments, and he was very, very prominent in like the carillon world as well, like church bells. He had a lot of innovations there. But so I just wanted to follow up on what Jeff said. I can assume that probably at the next PASIC we're going to see the debut of the Majestic tuned sleigh bell set. Is that what I'm hearing?
These guys put a pedal on a marimba for one. What? Wait, you cut out there. What'd you say?
Tis the season for sleigh bells.
Yeah, right. On everyone's mind. Somebody brought in, oh my gosh, at the gig that I'm playing this weekend, somebody brought in, I don't know specific, I think I'll meet the woman today, and we're going to ask, maybe she'll donate these to the percussion department, but they're like, like a leather strip with like huge bells on them. There's something on a farm, something with animals. I don't know exactly what it's used for, but I'm interested in finding out more, but they sound amazing. And they cut so much.
That actually reminds me very distinctly of a story about Lou Harrison, who worked in L.A. And I think Lou Harrison had written a piece that included elephant bells, and so I think it was Anthony Cerrone maybe was putting on this piece and went to like the zoo and asked like, hey, I need elephant bells for this piece, and like they gave them to him, and like for some reason they didn't like make sense. And so, like, he followed up and said, like, these really don't seem to be what the piece is asking for. And they went, oh, you're not looking for elephant bells. You're looking for ceremonial elephant bells, which is something else.
something completely different. Wow.
How silly of me.
Wow. You know, Ben, your segment reminds me of one of my regrets in life, which is one time when I was at the old Deagan factory, when it was Century Mallets, they were selling, there was just a printed sign on the first floor of the building that was selling Deagan's desk, like his work desk.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
Yeah, and okay, it's not an instrument, but how cool would that be to just have that in your house, you know? This was Deagan's, like, this is where he did his work.
How much was it selling for?
I don't remember. It might have said call for, you know, I don't think it was, or maybe it said the price. I don't think it was very expensive, but I don't have a house or a place to put a desk or anything. So if I would have, I would have bought it right away.
That reminds me of this is
so cool.
this is not really musically related, but at University of Miami, I can't remember if it's the music department is the Frost Music Department, and so it's Philip Frost has donated money, and they also have a scholarship program called the Stamp Scholarship Program, which is from Roe and Penny Stamps. I can't remember if it was the Frosts or the Stampses, but Svet Stoyanov was over at one of their houses, and he was admiring this desk. And someone said, "Oh, do you like that desk?" And Svet says, "Oh, yes, you know, it's a very nice looking desk." And they said, "Oh, yeah, that's Napoleon's desk, actually."
Yeah, don't touch that. Yeah. Yeah, don't play table music.
Wow.
Play table music somewhere else.
So it would be very cool to have Deagan's desk, I think.
I know. I wonder who got it.
Wow.
So speaking of instruments, Megan, it looks like you have a very nice instrument sitting behind you.
Walmart brand. This is my Secret Santa gift from, we had a Percussion Secret Santa exchange, and this was what I received. I'm going to use it today in the concert.
That it
My
sounds
first
great.
band, it says, yeah. Not bad.
Cool. Laura, what have you been reading?
Well, speaking of Napoleon Bonaparte,
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys happened to see the Google homepage this week, but it was the 245th anniversary of Beethoven's birth, so they had a nice little Beethoven doodle on their homepage, and I nerded out a little bit because I
That's
love
how I get my
Beethoven.
news, the Google Doodle. That's just how I keep in touch with what's going on.
Yeah, that's how I remember important things, is the Google Doodle. But I thought...
cards this year.
The what?
It's on the front of all my Christmas cards this year.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, good. So I don't know, thinking about that, and just everybody knows Beethoven, and there's probably something everybody loves about Beethoven, so I thought I would just maybe share some of my favorite things about him, or some of my favorite pieces, and if you guys want to add in or not, that's fine. But I have with me the very large new biography about Beethoven by Jan Swafford, who I actually mentioned last week. He's one of my former teachers and a contributor to Slate and other digital publications, and has several biographies under his belt to boot. This one is, I think, the newest Beethoven biography that's been published, and it's unique because he went over there on a Fulbright and did lots of research in Germany and Austria, and used a lot of sources that are only published in other languages that typically writers in English don't use, and so it's been kind of stamped as a different sort of biography of Beethoven's life. But anyway, when I taught, music appreciation for 6 semesters, I love talking about Beethoven because he seems to be one of those people that all the students heard of course. If you tell them a little bit about how he grew up and what his life was like for example, teaching, Beethoven was taught very much by his father at first because his dad was a musician, and you tell the students in a music appreciation class like it was a rather abusive relationship, and you see ears perk up and people start paying attention, and just because it's something they can deal with.
Yeah, it kind of humanizes him.
Yeah, exactly. He's no longer just a dead white guy. He's like someone who, lived and went through some stuff. And
I found myself skipping or short-changing Haydn and Mozart so I could spend that much
so
more
you
time
can
on Beethoven.
get to Beethoven. I know, yeah. And Swafford just writes so well. He says, Johann von Beethoven, which was Ludwig's dad, knew one way to keep his son in line, and that was with shouts, threats, beatings, and locking the little scamp in the basement. He even references letters of some of Beethoven's childhood friends who, had wrote memoirs that say they remember Beethoven standing on this little stool at what was probably a clavichord in his family home, and his dad was just lowering over him, making him practice. And that when Beethoven would make up little melodies of his own, his dad would say things, that's just something you made up yourself, you're not to do that. Yeah, and there was something else. Oh, what stupid stuff are you scratching at now? Just totally not very encouraging to his son, who would, of course, become one of the greatest composers of all time, essentially.
Yeah, you guys probably saw my son wander in here a little while ago. He wanted to come up here and play the marimba, and I told him he had to wait. So, gosh, I guess that makes me
Dude, you are terrible.
That means your son is going to be
Who
Beethoven.
Who knows what little prodigal melodies were going to come out.
That's awesome.
It's just a podcast, dude. Don't stifle me.
Yeah, right.
It's not the first time a small child has made a cameo on our podcast.
Very
true. That is true. Laurel, it'd be so fun to be one of Dr. Swafford's students again right now, because I would love to know. It's like, okay, yet another Beethoven biography. I would love to know, how well is that selling? Are people still, because I would love to get it, but only because I really know his work and really trust his teaching. But if I didn't know him, I don't think I'd be itching to get it, just because there's already 660 other Beethoven biographies that I still haven't read.
There are a lot.
It would just be a fun conversation to have with a musicologist. Just say so are you? I don't know. Do you feel like, oh hey, another Beethoven biography? I got to get it. We all got to. Is that still buzzing?
I don't know. I think what's interesting about Swafford, he's not merely a musicologist, he's also a theorist and a composer, and I think that allows him to look at the music in a certain way and then to discuss the music in a different way than those who are perhaps more just musicologists and not so much practitioners of composing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, of course we know that, but I wonder what that looks like to everyone else.
Yeah, that's a good point. He's also an incredibly witty writer, and is incredibly colloquial with these societies and cultures that are, very removed from our own. But is it Jeff I keep interrupting? Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think we're just a little slow. This volume that you just held up and we're talking about, does it focus on most of his childhood part of his musical development, or also later in life? And the reason why I ask is because I read somewhere one time that as Beethoven descended into his madness and dealing with his deafness and his composing, he had already had mental sketches of the 10th and perhaps the 11th symphony that had never been realized. And I wonder if there's anything that touches on that in this new writing, because that just seems to, I mean, wow, right? What if we had a Beethoven 10th symphony already?
Yeah, I haven't read it cover to cover yet. I've just kind of looked up certain bits of my favorite pieces thus far. But that would be interesting to know. And one of the sources that I know Swafford looked at that a lot of people, I don't know, it seems that sometimes people don't look at, was Beethoven's Taj book, which was like a diary. And yeah, it had a few sketches and things. And of course, we know there are like 600 pages for the Ninth Symphony or something like that. But his Taj book is something that, I don't know, I find a very human aspect of him that contains, quotes that he loved from poems and books, and even a lot of Eastern philosophies he has quotes from the Bhagavad Gita in this book.
Sounds like a
So
hippie.
that was a total tangent from what you said, Jeff. Sorry.
So
I
I have
This is
to
long paraphrase.
I have to run in just a second, but I wanted to share my Beethoven story because actually I didn't really even think about this till Laurel brought this topic up for us. But one of the reasons that, and maybe actually the reason that I pursued music as a kid that ultimately turned into my current career, is that when I was like in second grade, there was this video game called Earthworm Jim 2. Did anyone else have that? And there was a level where you went through like someone's intestine, and the level, it was a pun. The level was called the Villi people, which I didn't get till many years later because the little things in your intestines are called villi. But the music on this level was the first movement of Moonlight Sonata, and I remember, yeah, it's really weird. And I looked at a YouTube clip of it to make sure I was right. But I remember as a kid that the tune of Moonlight Sonata, like I would just play that level over and over and over just because I like the music so much on it. And this was right around, I don't know if that was the reason I started taking music lessons or if it was just happened to be right around the time that I did, but that was like the first piece of music probably that I ever like fell in love with and really started me as a musician all through this, silly Super Nintendo video game. But yeah.
That's awesome. Awesome.
Awesome.
Yes, Super Nintendo, right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah,
SNES.
let's get the facts right. Yeah, Super Nintendo, Super NES.
Nintendo.
Yeah, you see Beethoven in a lot of. I know another game that has Moonlight Sonata in it, but anyway, yeah. Ben, hey, well, we know you got to run, dude. Thanks a lot for your segment. Excellent segment. All overlay, all sorts of cool Deagan stuff. So have a good gig, buddy.
Excellent. Thanks. See you guys later.
Bye.
Yep,
Bye.
later,
Yeah.
Ben.
I will just what?
How many Beethoven symphonies have you all done? I know I've only done 3, 5, 6, 7, and 9. I guess that's a good chunk. Jeff, you've probably played several. I always see you on Facebook standing behind some timpani.
I have. I've played 4, 7, and 5 for sure that I can recall timpani-wise. I'm scheduled to play the 9th in the spring. I jumped out of the camera shot for a second because I have a filing cabinet over here with a bunch of stuff that's not terribly well organized. But what I was trying to find, and I'll share it with you guys when I do find it, is a research paper on, it's not a research paper that I did, but somebody else did, on a timpanist during Beethoven's time named, I think his name was Igor Munker. And he was one of the first German virtuosos at the timpani who Beethoven consulted very closely with on writing parts for most of his later symphonies. As his symphonies went on into the higher numbers, the timpani parts got more and more intricate, and he was a close confidant of this timpanist who told him the capabilities of how far you could tune or how many the technicality of the passages for instruments, or for instance on the Ninth Symphony. And it's a really interesting read how he was sort of Beethoven's partner in crime on those timpani parts.
Wow, that's
so
interesting.
cool.
Like Elliot Carter's Jan Williams.
Sure.
Well, I think that so many of them have a guy like Brahms' violinist Joachim, and Xenakis has a percussionist that's responsible for so. Yeah, it seems like they always have a guy. Growing up myself, my teacher Dennis Griffin, my childhood teacher and undergraduate teacher, he always said Beethoven's timpani writing is just surprisingly really, really, really good. And yeah, obviously we all can agree with that.
Yeah. It's crazy.
I've been
something
to the Beethoven's birthplace in Bonn.
Oh, cool.
And it's quite something to see if you've never seen it before. There are some original manuscripts, and you're sort of able to walk through the house where you lived as a child. They're into that sort of ground zero type experience. It's pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my, I'll just say this to finish up. I love all of his piano sonatas, of course, but one of my favorite movements of his is from his string quartet in C sharp minor.
Yeah. The weird one.
So good. Yeah, the first movement. It's he wrote it at the very end of his life. Like, he didn't really tackle string quartets until the end of his life, which is interesting because he studied with Haydn, and Haydn is of course known for his string quartets. So that's just kind of interesting. But it's Opus 131, and he wrote it when he was very sick, and his nephew Carl was, hated him and had already tried to kill himself once, and it was about to do it again. And like in the midst of finishing this quartet, Carl did try again, failed again. But anyway, it's a beautiful, beautiful movement. If you guys, anybody listening, has never listened to the first movement of Opus 131, it's beautiful. And when I played it for my music appreciation classes, it was one of the few times that I could look out at everybody and nobody was on a phone, nobody was talking. They were actually just sitting and listening to it. When you give them kind of the backstory of his life, and it's a movement that Wagner says is the saddest notes of music ever written. It's the movement that Schubert on his deathbed wanted to hear play for him in his room. So you tell that to students, and it's like, yes, finally there's hope for the masses. Never mind, this is a pretty drastic movement, but at least it's something. You're hearing something. So
I think the masses are more open-minded than we often think, or than it appears. And we've learned that through teaching that class, Laurel, certainly.
Yeah. If it's introduced as a human wrote this, humans are playing it, a human is listening. Yeah.
It's rare that we dig this far back into history because, usually we're talking about either current percussion topics or our history, which is not, we usually don't get back as far as Beethoven and something. I've been studying a lot of music history recently for comps, and something that has struck me, and I was looking up the number of works that Beethoven wrote, and I guess there's about 250 surviving works. And that has, it always surprises me the number of works that early composers wrote, like Vivaldi, he wrote around 500 concertos. That's crazy, and I know a lot of that was, working for the church or working for patrons. But how does anyone put out that much music, and especially in some of these short lifespans? It's just crazy to me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's absolutely wild.
And with no finale or Sibelius.
They didn't have video games, though. So, if I didn't have video games, I'd be president of the U.S., no problem.
They did have wine.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I should rethink my thinking there. Yeah, they probably did drink more than we did. Megan, do you have something for us today?
I do. Yeah, so I wanted to talk today about internships in the percussion industry, since we have Jeff here. And so I did a little bit of research on what's out there. And a couple of big ones that popped up first were Pearl. I'll give you just a little bit of information about a couple. So for Pearl has a summer internship, and they kind of advertise it that you gain insight into the marketing and distribution of percussion instruments. So you're working with the marketing department. And you have to be, for this one, you have to be enrolled in a degree program. You have to be in college or university. And the preferred fields of study are marketing, advertising, music business, public relations, graphic design, and media. And with this one, you have a pretty intense, or pretty normal, I guess, work schedule. You're working Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5. You have to be at least 20 years of age, and you actually have to be in Nashville for this internship, and it's unpaid. And for this one, you have to send a cover letter and a resume. And the couple of things that I just listed there, I think you'll find in the other ones that I mentioned, that they all want similar things. They all want to cover letter, and they all want a resume. So just two things to keep in mind. For the Yamaha internship, they have been in orchestral internships. There's not a specific one up right now, but they are in different areas: marketing, sales, research, and development for wind instruments, concert and marching percussion, strings, education, sales, programs, and research and development. So there are a lot of different internships in a lot of different areas for that one. Again, no specifics listed right now. And then kind of outside the percussion industry, there's internship for WGI and DCI. These sound really cool. For the WGI one, you're assisting with organizing materials and schedules, managing shipping calendars, creating documents and signs to assure the events run smoothly. And the assignments focus on operational tasks as well as on event on-site operation. This one's interesting because it's a little bit more flexible, approximately 10 to 15 hours a week, and it can be flexible based on your school schedule, but also during the 9 to 5 workday. However, of course, during WGI finals in Dayton, that's when this internship really ramps up, and it's 2 weeks in April that will include 16 to 18-hour days. And this one, there is a stipend available for this one. Again, resume and cover letter have to be sent in. For DCI, sounds similar, except you have to be in Indianapolis for this one. Let's see. This one gives you the opportunity to dig in and get their hands dirty, learning, collaborating, working on real projects, and experiencing what it's like to work at a world-class event management organization. These internships are available year-round as needed, but the summer ones, again, are kind of the big set ones because that's when the DCI season is. Summer session internships are full-time, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, $200 weekly, and you have to be in Indianapolis for this one. Other internships I kind of saw information about, but I think there's a Vic Firth one. I couldn't find the information about it on their website. Tycoon Percussion looks like they have one, but the information maybe hasn't been updated. Also, the PAS internship is really great. Those are available for the fall and spring semester. 6 month internships where you assist with a variety of staff projects, including those relating to music products, teaching, concert production, publishing, artist management, and marketing. There's a $1,200 stipend each month for that one, and you have to relocate to Indianapolis. To apply for that, this one's a little more intense. There's an application and reference list, cover letter, resume, and a special project paper where you have to describe an experience in which you were chiefly responsible for planning and implementing a specific project or event. Include details describing problems encountered and solved. So it actually seems like we're in a little bit of a middle period for applying for these because summer ones have ended, or applications would be over for spring semester ones, and the summer, there's not a lot of details about summer internships up yet, but I would imagine those will be posted soon. So anyway, I always try, sometimes I think that these internships are kind of overlooked, and I think that they're probably a really great chance to not only make some good contacts, but also really get a look into what it would be like to work in the percussion industry. So Jeff, I don't know if you have any opinions or if you ever participated in any of these or have students who have participated in them, or if you recommend them or know of any other internships available.
I never had a percussion industry internship. I'm thinking right now, I don't think I ever had an internship of any kind. But I will say that I'm familiar with all of these that you mentioned. I work with some of them now, sort of from the other side. Like I'll interact with the WGI interns and the DCI interns and the Percussive Arts Society interns from time to time as we're all leading up towards events or the marching season or what have you. And I think there are the value of an internship like this is one of those things that it's hard to measure up front. It's sort of so what I'm trying to say is maybe all of them are not awesome. Maybe some of them are. It sort of depends on the people involved. Like most experiences that we know as students and as educators, if you've got you know, a teacher who's not particularly interested in what's going on, the student experience is not going to be particularly great. If you as a teacher have a handful of students that are more interested in goofing around, the experience is not going to be particularly great. So it mirrors that scenario. You know, if you've got marketing personnel who aren't really interested in mentoring anybody, then they're probably going to have a pretty boring summer. They're probably going to get stuck with some paperwork or something, and they might learn a little bit of what it means to be in the drum business, but to really have an enriching experience, it's all about the individuals. I'll just say, you know, that's kind of obvious, but it's very, very true. There are some good things that come out of that. I think if you really are interested in a music industry job, this is a very good way to start to learn about what that means. Most of the time, the first lesson that every intern learns is that it's not all about the music all of the time. Most of us as music majors that go through a program, you know, you eat, sleep, and breathe your instrument. You're playing and practicing and learning all of the time, and then all of a sudden at the end of 4 years, it sort of crashes because now I don't have a practice room, and now I don't have 7 rehearsals all week and 3 gigs on the weekends because I'm no longer in a place where that's happening around me. And when you enter into an internship, you realize that there's some mathematics involved, there's some paperwork involved. You have to have meetings about planning. We have factories to purchase materials from. We have sales forecasts to maintain. So in that regard, it's very, there's not much music involved at all. It's about doing business. So you learn that part of it, which could be applied if you went, I suppose, and got a job in a toaster factory instead of a drum factory. Everyone has to learn the mechanics of business. So that's one sort of lifting the curtain off of what looks like a dreamy internship. There's some hard lessons to learn there. Now, there can be a lot of fun too, because those of you who have hung out with us, we have a good time. When it comes to
You guys are good at
on-site
drinking.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but it's fun. We're fun people.
They're good at. Yep. Okay. All right.
Yeah, and they're yeah. Let's just not go off on the tangent too far. But there are stories. For instance, I was at Pearl during the time we started that internship program, and one of the first Pearl interns is Nick from Innovative Percussion. He was a Pearl intern, and he went on to get a job at a stick company. So
Nick
I mean,
Phillips?
there are things, yeah. So there are obvious success stories that come out of these. I'm sure there are others. So I do think if there's some interest, these are valuable pursuits.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Hey, I have a question I'd like to pass on to you that I've gotten from young people often, and that is, how do I get sponsored?
There's not a day goes by that I don't answer this question to somebody along the way. It seems like there's a little bit of a misconception sometimes for those pursuing a relationship with a manufacturer. The misconception is this, that aligning yourself with a brand might somehow afford you more gigs or get you sort of more work or propel your career in some way. That's kind of a backwards way of looking at it. Us as manufacturers are interested in partnering with people who are hardworking and already have something accomplished or are on their way to accomplishing something in and of itself.
Yeah.
So you get that question about, well, my band is about to get signed, or something like this, and gosh, I think Mapex could really help me, and I think that's a little bit of a misconception. It's
I think I can help out what you're trying to say, because I'll get asked, how do I get sponsored, how do I get published, and not to diminish anything that a publisher or a sponsor like you guys does to help us, but the thing I always end up telling them is, if you're actually not going to get either of those things until you don't need them anymore. because you do have to be off on your own, doing your things. You do have to be really visible. You already need to be playing concerts, because you're right. It's a misstep. The young person always says, well, if I was sponsored, I could get more gigs, and I could get accepted to more things, and they would set me up with gigs. It's like, no, they're not going to be interested in you unless you're already getting gigs. You need to be active and performing and visible. Likewise with a publisher. Well, if I only had a publisher, I would be able to get my music out there. They don't want to publish it unless it's out there. And sadly enough, I don't know if publishers are interested in good music. They're just interested in music that sells. So, yeah.
Sure. There's this sort of misunderstanding of a position of influence, because at the end of the day, we are aligned with people who can influence the sales of our brands in a positive way. Some through exposure, whether it be online or on television or in a university setting or conservatory setting or something like this. And there are other relationships that we have that are more for research and development purpose. If there's really an expert in an area that we'd like to have on our team that can help us develop something specific, there's an idea, or there's some value there. But that's another one of these sort of, it's not very fun to talk about, because we bring the business part of it in, and it's less about the music. It's more about, truly, can you influence our sales? Can you help us sell more stuff? That's the root of these relationships. Now, we obviously are not a company that's just selling shoes or bicycles or something. There's an inherent sort of feeling, a love of music, a love of sound, a love of artistry that goes along with this. So it's a different bit of artist relations. That's why they call it artist relations, because really we're forming relationships because now I'm painting myself in the corner, aren't I? Because
there's a balance. Certainly, it's not just is the group or person visible, but also, do they do they meet an artistic standard that you're interested in?
Mm-hmm.
I can even testify to a specific experience. Rick DeYoung, who is a artist relation there at Majestic and KHS America, he asked me once, we were watching a group that was playing on a very high platform, and he asked, let's talk about these guys sometime. I want to know your opinion about this group. And I can see they're visible. I can see they would sell the product, but do they meet this artistic standard? I want help feeling that out. So I mean, I know what you're saying. There's a balance, of course.
Like, we started this conversation with the question, how do I get sponsored? Well, maybe a young player or a young artist might flip the attitude a little bit and bring something to the table. Maybe ask a different question. How can I have a relationship with you, Mr. Company, because I have this idea, or I can bring something to you? That might be an interesting way to start a different version of this conversation that might mean something down the road.
Yeah. Well, hey, you guys, it's been really good. Thanks so much for your segments. And I just have, let's see, a quick housekeeping thing to say. Many of you have been requesting the podcast on an audio format. It should be on iTunes probably by the time this episode is posted. It's definitely available in audio format on @percussion.blogspot.com. That's AT Percussion, all spelled out, at blogspot.com. Is that right, Laurel?
Yep.
Okay. That's there. And quick shout out to Bill Shaltis, because we had him on the show and we were talking about finishing dissertation work. So, Bill, congrats on finishing your big gig and being Dr. Bill Shaltis now. That's really cool. And let's see. Oh, last thing, Megan, look at my shirt.
Woo! MPAT! Yay!
So MPAT is MPAT is the let's see if I say this right, the Mid-Missouri Percussive Arts Trophy, which is probably, man, the best competition I've seen for such a wide range of ages. So that happens in Missouri. If you're anywhere near Missouri, you got to look into that. It's a very, very cool competition that Carol Hebel runs. So
Says
Anyway,
March.
in March. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Megan. Hey, you guys, thanks so much. A blast as always. And Jeff, thanks so much. Happy holidays to everybody, and an awesome winter break to you all.
Excellent.
Cool.
Can I leave you with a quick wrap
Of course.
statement here,
Yeah.
Mr. Host, host of hosts? Another former guest on this program, and we've been talking about artist relations, so I'm going to drop it here on this podcast for the very first time. I'm happy to announce Ted Adkatz has joined the Majestic Percussion Orchestra.
Cool. Wow, that's great, dude. That's so funny.
You heard it
Did
here
you-
first.
Woohoo!
Woo! Yay!
That's great. Well, that's part of the reason we're taking a break over the winter break is that Laurel and I will be in Australia at the Ted Adkatz seminar.
Cool.
So
Right.
and actually we're supposed to be doing a at Percussion while we're there, so we will get to interview Ted and all that. That's great, and that's really cool. Way to go, Ted. That's a super good choice. And man, congrats to Majestic. You guys picked up Tom Burra, you picked up Shi Wu, and now you picked up Ted Adkatz. That's really cool. Okay, adios, y'all. Thank you.
Bye.